Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's VetNet. My name is Michelle Weisner, and I'm the director of the volunteer program here at Hire Heroes USA. With me today, I've got my colleague Jason Dozier, who is our manager of plans and operations at Hire Heroes. And today's VetNet is an extra special session. We've got two guest speakers, Mr. Brent Carter and Chris Schaefer, who are going to be talking to us about bridging the military to civilian gap as you transition out and are working on your first civilian career. So we're excited to talk to them today, really excited to hear what they have to say. Before we begin their presentation, I'd like to take just a few minutes to talk to you about what VetNet is, in case you aren't familiar. VetNet is a partnership between Google, the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, and then our organization, Hire Heroes USA. And essentially what we're trying to do is put out some really solid resources for our veterans and their spouses through this online platform. So it's very convenient for those of you who are going through the job search, have specific questions, and want to get those answered. For those of you who aren't familiar with Hire Heroes USA, we are a national 501c3 nonprofit, and we work to empower U.S. military members, veterans, and spouses with succeeding in the civilian workforce. So we're here to help you with your job search, writing resumes, interview skills, LinkedIn, basically anything, any support that you might need when you're going through the job search. And all of our services are provided free of charge to veterans and their spouses. And in case you want to learn more about Hire Heroes USA, you can visit us at our website, hireheroesusa.org. So switching gears, I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers with some very brief remarks. I'm sure they'll do a more thorough job of talking about their background as we go through the introduction. Brent Carter is a consultant and university professor and researcher in the fields of behavioral leadership and brain science, crisis management, and organizational adaptation. Chris Schaefer is a retired veteran of the U.S. Army, very thankful for his service, where he spent much of his career in the 3rd Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha Teams. And he has 2 master's degrees, one in business and project management. So together they work with an organization called Solid Red Concepts, and they've done a lot of research on the side of corporate America. So what corporate America is looking for, what the misconceptions are in terms of hiring military veterans, going through that application process. And so basically they're here to share with us what they've come across in their research, and we're very excited to hear from them today. So with that, I'm going to toss it to Chris and Brent so we can get started.
Well, Chris, I'll go ahead and open it up if that's all right.
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having us today, Michelle and Jason. We're really thrilled to be here. You know, Chris and I had a wonderful opportunity meeting with many military service members over the past few years that we've been doing our research, and this is just a really great opportunity for us. So we're thrilled to be here.
Yep, absolutely, Brent. Thanks for that introduction. I mean, we've been researching this for almost 3 years now, and we think that our collaboration together between us two really bring a lot of benefit for soldiers to understand the corporate side of the house. So
Michelle, I think we can go to our first slide there. So on our agenda for today, we've got a little talk that we want to cover on post-traumatic stress. You know, there's a lot of things that Chris and I do, and most of it is all on the advocacy side, almost you could call it, from a standpoint where we go and we work with corporate agencies, non-military organizations, to try and help them understand the military mindset. And we feel like that this is a critical piece to ensuring a couple of things. One of them is that we want to make sure that corporations are hiring our veterans. That's very key. But honestly, for our standpoint, that's not our entire focus. We want to get vets hired, but ultimately, when we walk and we talk about corporate agencies and we talk to hiring managers, we're often talking to individuals that have either no military background or have very limited background in the military from perhaps friends or family members and so forth. And so their exposure to what the military mindset is very limited. And so we take a lot of different approaches. We cover a lot of big things that we feel like are our biggest concerns. And just talking about the three that we've got on our agenda today, I think that these are things that Chris and I have seen in talking to these various leaders where the biggest problems often come up. Post-traumatic stress is clearly an important thing for us to talk about today. It affects so many soldiers, and it affects them in so many different ways. And unfortunately, our Hollywood entertainment machine, the media, as well as just the inherent myths and misconceptions that happen within an organization, create a lot of misconceptions on what post-traumatic stress is. So we often talk about that. We'll also get into leadership training and cultural differences as well. But Chris, I'll let you fill in any gaps there.
Yeah, Brent, thanks for that. The post-traumatic stress thing is very important to us, but that leads into a lot of the things. Obviously, on this slide here, the leadership piece is very important to us, and getting that tacit ability translated to corporate America so that they can understand it and not have misconceptions about the way we lead. Some of those things lead to corporate America thinking that we're very rigid. And so we want to bring those abilities that you can't put on paper up front and center for those hiring managers, those HR professionals, even VPs of companies to understand that this method of leadership and the training that those veterans receive is value added in many ways to corporate America. I mean, corporate America spends a bunch of money on developing their leaders and leadership training, and the Army has, and the armed services, rather, they do a very good job of doing that already. And so corporations in America can capitalize on that, but it's important for soldiers to understand that that's a very good way to sell themselves, if you will, as far as leadership training. And then we're going to go on a little bit of the cultural differences, which are vast, and we'll get there later because I think we probably need to spend a little time on that.
So why are we here? Ultimately, as Chris and I mentioned, we come from two different backgrounds. And if Chris will allow me, I'll tell the story about how we met. We first started out in the same class. I was teaching a leadership course, and I happened to have this individual in my class by the name of Chris Schaefer. And he was a very interesting student. He had one of those backgrounds that I've had, having not served myself, but having a lot of exposure to the military and a lot of individuals at various levels and different branches. I understood a lot of the vernacular. I understood a lot of the subtle assumptions that you can sometimes pick up of somebody that has had certain type of background. And Chris differentiated himself just by being quiet, and so that was one of the first ways. But one of the great things is that Chris started illuminating a lot of areas within the deep military mindset that I had not been fully exposed to. And what I realized is that I had been fully exposed to the I guess we can talk about our corporate friends over there, the highly dysfunctional corporate American world that can often be out there. And when we brought our two worlds together, we really saw that they weren't as different as everyone claimed. We thought that there were definite alignments that were in place, and there were many places where corporate America could experience bottom line financial improvement, could receive better cohesive teams, could have a better ability to train and communicate, to lead people, if they implemented a lot of the things that our soldiers learned all the time. And naturally that played into having soldiers within the corporate America, but it also played into how corporate America could actually improve itself. And so our why essentially came to, how can we actually help educate corporate America and develop those leaders to understand the full value of what a United States military veteran brings to the story.
Yeah, and from my side there, Brent, I was still struggling with what I wanted to do and who I was after taking off the Green Beret. It's not like, as in our culture, that we're different. We were civilians beforehand, we'll be civilians afterwards. And so the understanding that you brought to me about corporate America and where we differed and where there were very similar parallels, and basically where we could help each other out was really what started this whole thing. And I think that's why we make a great team. So, and Brent, I'm going to let you go ahead. Brent's for our company is kind of the lead on the post-traumatic stress. When we do our briefings, I usually just bring I guess the story, if you will, about PTS to light because of the differences in the conflicts. Every conflict's different. Not that PTS is any different with any other conflict. It's that it does affect us in different ways. And so I kind of try to bring in, I do bring in my own experiences with post-traumatic stress. And then what we do is we kind of explain the definition of it, we go through it, and then we go over some of the myths and misconceptions. So Brent, why don't you go ahead and start this piece, and then I'll just fill in where needed, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, so one of the things that you'll notice is that we keep on saying the words post-traumatic stress. And that collides a little bit with what you probably hear elsewhere, which is this whole idea of a disorder. And, Chris will speak to this here in a minute, I'm sure. But the idea is that when it comes to talking about post-traumatic stress, we want to start disassociating, just from a naming convention, the idea of a disorder. It's not that the disorder goes away. And ultimately, if you think about what a disorder is for, it's really nothing more than a classification. And there's actually a manual that exists within the psychological world that is their statistical manual on how to go about representing exactly what post-traumatic stress is. What are the factors? What are the symptoms? What's the normal behavior that we would expect whenever post-traumatic stress occurs? And this is obviously within trauma from war. Clearly, this plays into trauma from, a massive car accident, the loss of a child, a violent act. So a lot of these areas naturally affect human beings because they are normal reactions to a non-normal situation. And so when we talk to our soldier community, what we really want to emphasize is that we really want to disassociate a little bit this idea of a disorder. Everyone goes through post-traumatic stress, so how can we actually work with that? So whenever you hear us talk about PTS, we'll be talking about PTS, post-traumatic stress. We're going to remove the disorder because, for one thing, we aren't here to talk to corporate America from a clinical psychological standpoint, and we're not here to advise them on what therapies that they should look into for individuals that might have PTSD. That's for another story and for another discussion. But what we look at is how does post-traumatic stress, and especially in the myths and misconceptions of it, affect the way that teams behave, the way that leaders and their people behave, the way that someone that doesn't understand what PTS is can completely make judgments and make mistakes in how they relate to those people. And it can cause a compounding effect. It can create individuals that are feeling even more isolated. If you're having PTS symptoms, you didn't sleep well the night before, you come into work, you're tired. If your boss knows that you have PTS and has a distorted view on what that means, then his stories are running through his head completely inaccurate to what the reality of the situation is. And maybe it just means that you need to take a little bit more time during that day to be able to go out and go for a walk. If you want to talk to somebody. If you don't want to talk, to be able to be quiet. These are normal responses, so there should be a safe place in which to do that, in a safe way in which to live it out within a corporate setting. So that's my long approach to that slide. So let's talk about the stigmas and misconceptions. Chris, do you want to start us off, and then I'll fill in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to kind of segue into the reason also why it's important for veterans, I think, to disassociate themselves with the disorder. Even though you may have it, that D actually does a lot more than just give you the clinical proof that you may have it or whatever. And it's my experience that a lot of veterans associate PTSD with being less than fully capable. Or I've been to war and now I'm damaged goods. And I see it all the time. You can go to the VA, you can watch these guys. Several of my friends feel the same way. And so therefore that's the important part for a veteran, I think, and for corporate America, is to get away from the disorder piece. Like Brent said, it's a normal reaction to an unnormal circumstance. And anybody in corporate America, or civilian, non-civilian, whatever, can have the symptoms of PTS. And therefore, just because it's a soldier coming to try to get a job, and they have it on their resume that they were a veteran, or they are a veteran, there are some misconceptions that we all have PTSD. And obviously that's one of the things that we try to overcome also. And it's interesting to us is that that's not an issue with anybody else that has a resume without being a veteran, but it is when it is a veteran. So and those are some of the things that we've got to overcome. And I think the first thing in that is just making sure that the veteran feels that, hey, it's okay. Everybody has these experiences. It doesn't have to be just combat related, and that you are fully functional. So, and that's why we were going to go over some of these stigmas and misconceptions. And that's what the point of this whole thing is to really just educate those that don't have a full understanding of it. It's Hollywood. Everybody that wore a uniform kicked doors and blew stuff up and had these traumatic experiences, which all of us in the military understand that that's not true. There's only about 1% of the military that actually do that. So that's why we're trying to educate corporate America into this, so they don't disqualify us immediately for something that they can't even legally ask about, but it does exist. So.
Good. So let's run through this list and kind of talk about some of these things. And I think all of them are important. Obviously the loose cannon, social dysfunction is key. Most of the soldiers that we've even talked to, and I've had experiences as late as last week, which were definitely a soldier that was assigned 100% PTSD from the VA, and had an event just occur because he had some triggers happen. There was nothing about a loose cannon. There was no social dysfunction. It was just a matter of feeling that there was mental suffering going on. And so it was an opportunity for me. It was a wonderful opportunity because I had an individual who was in the military for only 3 years who was talking with him about this situation. And this individual, started to feel like he was shortness of breath. His eyes started to become really, bloodshot, and he needed to sit down for a while. And so when we sat down, I started talking to him. I said, what are you going through? Tell me what's going on. And I said, and if you can't, that's okay, but I want to know how I can help you. And so it was a matter of just de-escalating that situation. But if I would have gone into the situation, from a corporate misconception standpoint, and assumed that, I need to fear this individual as opposed to engage with him, then we would have a totally different outcome. There would have been no de-escalation. We wouldn't have been able to find help, for this individual in that time of mental crisis. An hour later, he was doing just fine. So, these are the things that we have to realize, that if we don't do something about them, and I tell this to my corporate friends all the time, our ignorance makes a big difference when it comes to post-traumatic stress. If we think that an individual can't function within a civilian team when they're having challenges on a given day, then are we going to go and judge everybody else that is going through similar challenges? When I know somebody that's been through a car accident, I'm quite willing to say, hey, you've had a traumatic day. Maybe you need to go home and then take some time and come back. But are we going to do that if I have a misperception about what PTS is for an individual that's having a PTS incident? Obviously, Chris, I'll let you talk about loud noises because you laugh at this all the time, is that if somebody accidentally knocks a book over and it hits the floor, that's not a loud noise that's going to set off or trigger a behavioral moment for somebody that has PTS.
James, and that's go ahead, James. Okay, no issue. So talking about this, Brent, you're right. So we are trained to deal with loud noises. So the perception that you have to be careful around a veteran that has PTS because if you drop a book on the floor, he may go off. Well, that's such a misconception because we're trained with those loud noises all the time. I know the difference between a car backfiring and gunshots, trust me. Most veterans do. The other misconception is, oh, we've got to make sure that we don't set him with his back to the door. Well, you know what? There's a lot of triggers that have to come into play, I think, and that is not usually one of them. My own experience is I know I'm in a safe place, whether it be at a restaurant or wherever it is, a school, my workplace. It doesn't really mean that there's a threat and that I am going to revert to my old training or be triggered because of an event that happened downrange that makes me uneasy with my back to the door. The environment is completely different, and I know that. You wouldn't revert to being excited if you're driving in a car after you had a car accident. You would just be a little more cautious. It may be a trigger if you come up to the same intersection. However, just driving in your car doesn't mean that you need special needs or to be more cautious than you would otherwise any other time. So those are some of the things that we try to get over to get to corporate America to say, hey, look, these are really just kind of Hollywoodish, they don't really make sense, and they're really not that prevalent. They're not going to happen. So.
And lastly, as we close out this page, the important thing to remember when we talk to our corporate friends, we're trying to reprogram their minds to an extent where they say, an individual that has post-traumatic stress might be wound a little bit too tight, and we don't know what's going to happen. It's potentially unpredictable behavior. That's absolutely ridiculous. And second of all, when the assumption is that whenever somebody's having or has PTS, and this also happens even when corporate individuals are speaking to soldiers sometimes. Sometimes they'll say, so what did you do? And the question is truly meant, in most cases, it's meant as a sincere question, meaning I'm trying to understand. The problem is that oftentimes our civilians in corporate America will only be able to go so far to be able to understand what the true military experience is like. They certainly are not going to be able to understand what war is like. None of them, and I tell this to my corporate friends all the time, none of them have ever written a letter to their family members before they go to work in case something happens. Yeah. They've never had to do that. So the context is entirely different. Now, it doesn't mean that the two worlds don't meet, but it's important that as we advocate, the military mindset into the corporate American mindset, that corporate America does understand that there is more to this story than just appearances and hearsay and so forth. Next slide, please. So I'll hit the psychological myths of PTS, and I usually talk to this just because we're talking about the brain sciences oftentimes when we talk about post-traumatic stress. And usually in our workshops, what we'll do is we'll walk through individuals, tell me about an event that you might have gone through, or give me an example. And then we try and correlate that to, well, what is it like to be going through an event, a traumatic event in the military? And we try and tie those things together. I use a couple of visual aids to help that, and it actually works quite well. But it's certainly not a sign of mental weakness. We all go through different responses to different events that happen to us in our lives. Every stressor is also not a potential event or a trigger for post-traumatic stress. So just because a young girl lost her dog, although that is a traumatic comprehension of trying to understand what death means, it's not something that's going to live with her forever, where that the next time she sees a dog, she's going to go into emotional distress because of her brain saying, I experienced immediate loss here, I will experience immediate loss again. Now, the brain is able to heal itself. Now, but when we work through things like war, it's sometimes a different story. And because of that, we have to use different types of capabilities and therapies, and beyond just talking sometimes, that help facilitate the brain being able to decouple strong emotion from strong memory. Let's see. Another one is that PTS happens immediately after trauma. Oftentimes, post-traumatic stress is all about being the post part, right? The trauma occurs, and sometimes it could be weeks, it could be a month before the actual impact of what the brain's trying to figure out, what the mind is trying to examine and analyze, really comes to this sometimes paralyzing moment. And from there, then that is a really important time for us to be able to look at how can we help the mind kind of, like I said, decouple this emotional trauma from the actual traumatic event itself. We kind of covered the idea that post-traumatic stress individuals can't function in military or in business. That's just absolutely ridiculous as well. We know that most soldiers that come back from any type of downrange deployment are going to have some degree post-traumatic stress, and obviously with the masses that are coming back now, and honestly the ongoing conflicts that we are continually going to be in. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and he said, this whole thing that's going on, with ISIS and everything like that, it's going to lead to World War III. And I thought, what are you talking about? We've been in World War III since 15 years ago. It's just that nobody's named it that. And it's certainly affecting our soldiers that way. And if not worse than any other world war that we've ever been in. And then last, go ahead, Chris.
Real quick, Brent, I'm going to intervene right here. And that's just the thing. I mean, like I was saying before, all conflicts are different. The Vietnam guys may have went once or twice. World War II guys, they went there and they stayed until it was done. I mean, they didn't come home. But for us, it is the continued redeployment, going back to that same battlefield, being there again. Myself, I have 9 combat deployments, and I got 6 to Afghanistan alone. That reoccurrence has far-reaching effects, not only for the individual, but also as secondary PTSD. And Brent does a real good analogy of this, and I can let you go into it a little bit. When we give this briefing to individuals and corporations and nonprofits, we always bring in the fact that it doesn't just affect the soldier; it also affects their family members, directly. And it is a wound. It is something that World War II vets are coming back now with symptoms of PTS because simply they've been asked about their experiences because we want to try to capture them. And it's been 70 years. Those things, can stay with you. Not that they need to stay with you forever. And it affects everyone differently. Certain traumatic incidents will obviously have more impact on some people than they will others. And so it's a very real thing, but the secondary PTS thing is also just as real. And I actually give some examples of that in our full-blown PTS briefing. So
that's a good point.
Okay, leadership. This is a big one, guys. And for those of you that are transitioning currently, our efforts to be able to bring what veterans have as leadership training, experiences, and value is a big part of what we do at Solid Red Concepts. With that being said, and Brent, I'll let you elaborate a little bit on this. For us in the military, there is a pretty well-defined definition of what leadership actually is, what it does. Each one of the branches obviously has a little different outlook on that, but the core values are pretty much the same. And the big part is this. Even while I was in school, there's a lot of texts that even at the master's level that really don't define the difference between leadership and management. First of all, can managers be leaders? Yes, they can. However, it is 2 separate entities. You manage things, you lead people. And I think us in the military, especially those that have been to any of the service schools, truly, really understand that. Those NCOs that have been, to their advanced courses also really have a very good grasp of this. But that doesn't mean that those that are transitioning that have been not even in NCO but have been in a leadership position, whether that be downrange or not, have a better understanding probably than most mid-level managers do in corporate America. And I'm going to let you go from there, Brent.
Yeah, I mean the fun thing that we usually do within our corporate workshops is I'll say, give me all the attributes of a manager, and so we'll go up and list all the attributes of a manager, and I'll say, okay, well, give me all the attributes of a leader, and then they'll put them all together, and then I'll say, all right, so tell me, why is it that the two lists aren't the same? And they say, well, obviously, we manage these resources, right? And then we lead resources. And I say, since when do you lead a resource? So a resource is a financial revenue engine, but a person is a person. And so you have to get into the ability to understand what it is about a person that makes them capable of being a good leader or a good follower. And then we go into talking about how the military has succeeded in doing that. But what we oftentimes do, we relate to in the corporate world is this idea of human resources. And so I always have this fight with HR all the time. I said, since when, is a human a resource? I'm like, well, that's a matter of semantics, Brent. So just, stop the idle chit chat. But ultimately, it's being able to say, okay, a person has these capabilities. These capabilities equate to a ability to service a product or a service. We sell that service at a certain rate, and we make a profit off of it. And I say, great. So when do those individuals stop becoming people? And I can tell you, exactly when it happens. It happens whenever there's a layoff. No one wants to ever quantify the loss of mind share and mindset that we experience whenever someone gets laid off. We don't want to think about that, because what if we lost the very key innovator that would have transformed our product set? But because we were so ignorant in being able to understand who they were, what their capabilities and competencies were, then we would never know exactly where we could have taken our business. A layoff may have never been required. But here you're touching on very sensitive toes when it comes to talking to corporate America. So we have to be careful with that. But I always want to illuminate that with my corporate colleagues to help them understand that there's more to the story. And when we understand oftentimes the way that a soldier is infused with these wonderful skill sets in order to perform a specific function, that they're contributing to a movement that's going to change the world potentially. So in the corporate world, what are we doing to change the world? Big topics to cover, right? Obviously, we talk about the comprehension of team cohesion under stress. This is a very key topic. I ask a lot of my corporate colleagues, what kind of stress do their teams go under? Well, obviously, deadlines is probably one big one. And I said, great, have you ever been under a deadline while being shot at? And then they go, well, of course not. I said, have you ever been under a deadline while being shot at in a dust storm? Well, no, of course not. What are you talking about? And I said, then you have not experienced the kind of stress that a soldier going downrange experiences. Now, imagine if you had somebody that could be in that kind of environment and be stuck in an envelope of massive amounts of stress, but you'll still be able to be trained and operate in a really rational way with strategy and tactical function and being able to execute on the mission while all these things are happening. Wouldn't that be the kind of person you want on your team? Wouldn't you want your team to be able to function that way? And we always get nods up and down. Absolutely, we would. So we start to find a lot of alignment about this time within our discussions with corporate America, because they start to see, hey, even though our world is complex and our world is dangerous, it's not as dangerous as what you've experienced. Wouldn't it be cool if I could have so much adaptation and be able to learn from failure and be able to have multiple ways of being aware of my situation while being under that massive amount of stress? What could that do to build back into my team?
Yeah. And Brent, also, there's a lot of talk also about the differences between competencies and qualities. So, in the corporate realm, these two things can collide. And a lot of times what you see is qualities like being charismatic, being the loudest, being able to do, X, Y, Z. But those things sometimes are equated to leadership ability. We know in the military that doesn't quite work that way. You still have to have your competencies. If you cannot do the job, if you don't know how to do the job, if you are not able to lead others in how to do the smaller tasks and be able to get them to do it, in a professional manner and with a certain level of excellence, then you don't have the abilities to move on to the next level, because you just can't handle 9 to 10, 12, 100, 200 guys. It's not that you're just not there. And so some of these things are lost inside corporate America. And we've had some studies and some papers that actually have been written that we researched about these two entities and that how sometimes they collide. And that also goes into a lot of appraisals, performance appraisals, and stuff like that that are they're a lot different in the civilian world. For us in the military, we should be able to know that we're going to have a monthly counseling statement as enlisted people. And on the officer side also, we have evaluations that we do. But these things are done on a routine basis. That's not exactly the practice in corporate America, as we found out. And I don't know, Brent, you could probably elaborate on that a little bit more. But
yeah, I think that, it's just become sad and also humorous at the same time, that we see a lot of organizations that focus on, well, I really appreciate your resume, thanks a lot, but I see that you don't have a lot of the certifications that I need you to have. And I know that even talking to Chris as well as some of my other military colleagues, that there is a focus on saying, hey, if you're a medic, then make sure that you go get your EMT certification, and make sure that there is you meet some of the civilian compliance models when it comes to what you have to be hired. What Chris and I are doing, though, is we're looking beyond that, and we're saying, yeah, you have to have the core competencies, obviously, but there is a way to translate those core competencies that equates to value within the company that you're trying to apply for. And the only way that we can actually communicate that value is for the corporation or the company itself to say, hey, we know that veterans have this capability. Even though they don't have the certification, we'll help them get the certification. But ultimately, we need what they bring that we could never train them for.
Right. And that goes to those core values for the leadership stuff.
Yep, for sure.
And then, I don't know if you wanted to go over the team downrange versus acute farm. I thought that was so funny when you put it in, but it's so true.
Oh, it was a thought of mine. It's like, how in the world do you equate, a team in one place to a team in another place?
Yeah.
It's like, I ask, in our corporate workshops, how many of you feel like that you can lead a team well? Great. So, and then we move into that, that discussion. Well, what if you had to take a team downrange? Okay, well, what if you had to take a team downrange and you're moving into a conflict, and that conflict is in the middle of dust storm, and you're missing logistical, access, and you're not getting all the resources that you need, but you still have to do the job? How are you going to succeed? Because there is no other option.
Right.
And you get these blank stares, and simply because these kind of level managers and leaders just haven't been to that level of testing. And that's why it communicates back, that the value of the veteran is very high. And it's not a matter of proving it, it's a matter of communicating it, because the proof is already there.
Right, and I think that really leads to the fact that corporate America really needs to understand that we are agile. Veterans have to deal with enormous amounts of stress and things that just don't go right, and we have to be able to adapt and overcome those things, and we do it all the time. And the misconception is that we're too rigid. So, yeah, great. Right into the next slide there. So, mission versus the time clock. This is a big one. And there's a lot of fallout that can happen from this, and Brent and I have talked about this quite often. So the scenario is that you're at the office, you're at the work site, whatever, and you have a project lead that is sick for the day, or has to leave, or depart the day, or just decides he doesn't want to be there, or whatever it may be. But your team lead leaves. In the military, that's not an issue. For us, we understand that we will continue with the task until it's done. A time clock is not an issue for us. However, in the civilian side of the house, not that this happens all the time, it depends on the company. But we have to understand as veterans that there is a time clock, and that time clock is very important to budgets and how much people get paid and all these other things. Whereas in the military, you never had that. So there are some cultural differences between completing a mission without a leader there, taking on the task, being able to do things without that leader and make those decisions, as compared to within the corporate sector, whereas if your leader is gone, there may be very well some things that you may need to understand. And one of them is obviously, if I decide to take the mission on myself, that I may be seen not so favorably to my peers, if you will, or maybe even leadership within the organization. Not that they won't, but if you decide to stay late to try to finish the job, there may be some fallout. And some of that includes the simple fact that, hey, you're making me look bad. Because I work in the cell next to you and the cubicle next to you, you stayed late and I didn't. Even though we may have the same abilities, there may be that animosity between you and your coworker. And the other thing is that understanding that helps us to adapt to that cultural difference. So the other thing is that when we talk about things as far as the military, it's always us, we, my team, how we as a unit went and conquered this. In the corporate world, it is I. I compete with the guy next to me for promotions and other things. And when it comes time for somebody to be promoted, I need to be able to talk about myself, what I did, what I contributed. And so in the military, our mindset is not focused on I. That's not even a part of our culture. It's always what we did as a team. And so those are some of the cultural differences that we need to understand. And we're really trying to bring that to corporate America. We understand that there's some things that we're not going to be able to change as far as cultures go within corporate America and some of the organizations. But I think if they understand the veteran mindset that, mission comes first rather than the time clock, and my team is going to stay and we're going to do it as a total, that is where we come from. And that's how we help our organization in the military to be successful, because I don't take it upon myself to outprove anybody else that I worked harder. I always include those around me as part of my success, and I hope that I can be part of their success so that they can move on within the corporation. And some of those, there's some differences there. Brent, you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the differences that we've seen is pretty simple. Is that it starts when a soldier wants to go and get hired. You stand before typically a low-level HR person in order to get that resume reviewed first of all. And the challenge that happens there is that if a soldier is unable to talk about the me portion, essentially it's about translating language almost, is that if I can't communicate what I've done, then it's very hard for that individual to understand who I am. And so what we find is that if we extend beyond that and we say, well, I was a part of, this organization, and this is kind of the things that we did. Here's what my skill sets were within that organization. This is what I think that I bring to your organization. So it's me being an integral part of where I was, as well as me being an integral part of who you are and where, we can go together. But as we start to tackle the cultural differences, obviously Chris and I both know that you're not going to change an organization that has 150,000 people. You're not going to change their culture, more than likely. But what you will change is you will change it team by team. And what I found is that whenever you can get the attention of leaders that have a team that can actually listen to you and understand how their culture may be inhibiting a great level of performance and response and cohesion and efficiency, they want to make that change. And it's not so much that they are, as much as you might think that corporate America has a a verse interpretation of what the military is. I know that the military has a verse interpretation of what the corporate guy is. You think that the corporate guy sitting in a tie is, all for himself, and that he's not going to care, about me. But oftentimes it's a matter of disconnection, and it's a matter of not understanding and not being able to willingly step into somebody else's story. And so what we're working to do is we're working with corporate America to step into the story of not only the soldiers that they might hire, but also the story of their own people, and understanding how the military mindset and all the things that come along with it actually affect and help that bottom line.
Right, absolutely. So go ahead, Brent.
No, I'm only going to open this with one line, and then I'm going to let Chris tell the story. So I came to Chris one day and I said, you know what? I said, I finally am starting to understand from a military standpoint what it's like to transition. Now, I will never understand what it means to transition, because I cannot understand the past story, how it integrates to the transition story, and how it integrates to the future, and the trauma almost that you could almost say that sometimes that creates. But what I've started to understand is the concept behind it. And I told Chris, I said, you know what it's like almost? It's like when you go downrange, and it's the first time that maybe it's not your first time in theater, but it's your first time into this specific region, this sector, right? And you're coming across a village that has some important intelligence and has a long-term play within the longer strategy of what you're going to be doing in that region. So it's important for you to be able to understand and align. And so I said, Chris, isn't this kind of like, a soldier that's transitioning out of the military into the civilian world? Isn't that kind of like entering into a giant new village, a new theater, where there's language, there's culture, there's miscommunications, there's protocols, there's the way that the civilian culture works. It's the way that people will negotiate. It's the way that they overcome conflict. Doesn't this all play together with the way that you would normally engage with a village? And so then I asked Chris, I said, well, tell me, how would you go about doing that? And is it the same as if I was transitioning to the civilian culture?
Yeah, and that rung so clear in my head, just because of the simple fact that when we do transition, we were civilians beforehand, okay? We went to the military, served our country, and then we're coming out. And as we transition from one environment to the next, we really need to understand our new environment, okay? The hard part is this. We watch football, we eat pizza, we drink beer, we all speak the same language, we all go to the same stores, we all celebrate Christmas at the same time. So, when you look at it initially, it's really nothing different. You almost feel like you should just fall right into it. But the problem is that civilian culture in corporate America is a new village. And so what Brent was telling me is like, Chris, when you go into these new villages, how would you approach it? And I'm like, well, we got to sit down, we got to understand geography, we need to know the people, we need to know the politics, we need to know the resources that they have, we need to know part of their culture, how do they do things, where do they get their stuff from, how do they interact with each other, what are their communication styles, verbal, nonverbal, all these things, where are their main arteries for transport, all this other stuff. A lot of that intelligence stuff has to go into understanding those new villages. And so not that we have to get that detailed when we go into corporate America, but it is a different environment, and we need to understand those things that Brent was talking about. There is a new language. It's not the same. We're speaking English, but there are some very different ways about explaining things and how to communicate with each other, and the communication is also different. When any of you that are listening or following along, when we went into Afghanistan for the first time, we had an Arabic speaker on our team, but he couldn't understand anything those guys were speaking because they were talking in a completely different dialect. That is exactly the same thing when you kind of go into corporate America. There's little nuances that make things a little bit different, you have to spend some time understanding it. And I think that's what's important about this whole concept of new village is that you need to take time to understand that new village. And each corporation being that it's its own entity in itself, it has its own certain type of culture. And for instance, Google will be completely different from GE. But those cultures you need to understand, and you need to do a little research before you go in there. But understand that doing that research will allow you the opportunity to be effective in that village. And I think that really resonated when Brent brought that to me as a concept for soldiers. And we're going to expand upon this as a company ourselves to bring a whole lineage, if you will, of seminars, maybe a couple of seminars, I don't know, and some e-learning stuff that actually identify this new village and just kind of over in a broad section give a concept for it. So we're excited about that. But that is the new village. So.
Well, we're close to our hour, but we want to make sure that we get in any questions that anybody has. So I guess, Michelle, if we could open up for questions at this time.
Sure. So if anyone participating would like to ask a question, just please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask the question directly to Chris or Brent. Alternatively, you can also type it in the chat box if you don't have audio capabilities, and we'd be happy to answer. As folks are trying to get settled and ask the questions that they have, I've got one for you both that I'd like to just start the conversation off with. So in terms of your research with different corporations and, their experience with, incorporating veterans into their culture, we've heard a lot from Hire Heroes USA's perspective. We've heard a lot about bigger corporations starting up either business resource groups or military affinity groups, such that internally within the company they're starting to recognize that, hey, we do have veterans, they're able to self-identify, and those who are, who have similar interests can join and work on those types of activities together, those types of causes together. So I'm curious if in talking to different corporations and HR professionals, during your research, if you found that creating those business resource groups or those military affinity groups, if that makes an impact on the culture of the organization and or how easy it is for different veterans to integrate into that company as their potentially first civilian career.
Chris, I'll take it first if you don't mind, and then I'll hand it to you. I think that's a really good comment, Michelle. So what we found is that organizations that do have those types of affinity groups are going to essentially have one important piece that organizations that don't have it won't, and that is dialogue. And the important thing is that we need to make sure that there is this open communication that allows civilians to be able to, within a company, to be able to talk to the military veterans and understand what's going on, and to have those forums available so that the topic for today on our military group is going to be leadership. Well, tell us a little bit about how leadership played within the military, and how we can translate some of those capabilities and those values into the way that we do business here at X Corporation. And that forum is really key to having dialogue, because dialogue then spreads and dispels myths and misconceptions and so forth. And oftentimes, we've seen a lot of companies, and you've seen them too, I'm sure, that go and brand a sticker on themselves as we are military friendly, right? But most of the time, we don't really know what that means. In some cases, it's organizations that are just trying to hire as many veterans so that they can say, we 10% of our employment staff is all veteran. That's one kind of metric, but it's certainly not the metric that we're after. We're after the metric that says we have hired veterans because they change our business. We hire veterans and their families and their spouses because they help us become better people and a better company. We help our bottom line, but they also become better at customer service, and they care and all these sort of things. Not to spout Starbucks at all, because I gave them way too much money as it is, but they have come out recently and say, hey, we are setting a public goal, and we would challenge other organizations to do the same. We want to hire, I think it was 100,000. Was it 100,000? I'm sorry, not 100,000. 10,000, I think, veterans within the next year, something like that. And so their focus was that we will then talk about that, about why we want to hire veterans. And so if you go up to their veteran website, you can actually see some of the reasons why, and it has very little to do with they help us sell more coffee. It's more about how their values, ethics, leadership capabilities, communication really infuse themselves into the culture and make a difference.
Right.
So Chris, I'll let you fill in.
Yeah, so Michelle, I've been in conversation with some individuals, some managers and stuff, and I had a interesting conversation with a soon-to-be retired sergeant major that went to an event and had some very high-level CEOs that were there, and the comment was made that the individual that owned the corporation loved veterans, but he also kind of gave us a hard time because what was happening in his organization is that the veterans were all finding out who each other were, and when projects would come, they would really lobby to get those other veterans onto their team. And then once the team of veterans got together, they would outperform everybody else. And so they weren't including others inside the corporation to come into their team because they were very comfortable with who they were working with. So the owner of the organization loved the vets in his organization that were doing awesome things, but at the same time he wished that they would have kind of shared the knowledge with each other. And so those are the organizations and some of the things that happen throughout organizations when veterans start to integrate. And those types of things really help define what veterans are capable of. But it's just getting to that point, if that makes any sense, to be able to get those veterans to share their knowledge and their wealth within those organizations. And I think that's important once they're there, because that'll help their culture to thrive and increase their bottom line for whatever organization they're at, just like Starbucks.
Right. It really sounds like, through all of this, that communication is really key, both on the corporate side and on the veteran side as well. So I appreciate you guys taking a few minutes to flesh out that answer for me. For those of you that are participating, are there any questions from the audience? All right. I do have one question that came in from offline, kind of in regards to PTS, and similar question in terms of communication. So we talked about the myths and stigmas that are out there, and how that can be difficult to overcome. And certainly there are companies and organizations like what you guys are trying to do in communicating how a lot of it is stereotypes and not necessarily a true reflection of reality and the characteristics that veterans have. But for the individual veteran who becomes a part of a new company and might be surrounded by people who have those misconceptions, do either of you have any recommendations for what that individual can do to maybe educate his or her coworkers about the fact that they are stigmas and myths? And I know, again, it's in the vein of communication, but if there are any, concrete examples of what to do when you are faced with that situation.
So you're talking about if I were a soldier and I'm clearly in an environment where individuals don't understand what post-traumatic stress is. Is that what your context? Yeah. I mean, from my standpoint, the way I look at it is that post-traumatic stress is inherently a reactionary type of behavior, and I mean, like the individual I was working with earlier this week, and again, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but this is certainly a situation that plays into some of the research that I've done in the past. And in talking with this individual, it was clearly a moment of crisis. Now, was this person, suicidal? Were they getting to some extreme point? No, they were just suffering, and they were suffering in their own recollection of emotion tied to deep memory and deep trauma. And so when I talk to them about this, and we work through that, well, what I continually realize every time that I speak to someone that has these kind of experiences is that PTS is truly reactionary. So in those times when I'm feeling good as a soldier in my job, and I have a good community around me, and we're sitting around coffee or we're at a break, or we're at lunch together, or something like that. And the opportunity comes up, and it's something that the soldier would like to talk about in order to kind of understand, hey, what do you guys think about it? I'm a soldier. You know that, you've heard, stuff in the news and everything like that. Just, I'm not trying to instigate a debate, but I'm just kind of curious. What do you guys think about it? And sometimes it's a matter of just leaving it at that, just hearing what somebody else says about it, and then you say, oh, well, that's really interesting. Well, maybe that's something we can talk about sometime. Obviously, it's not a time that you would want to talk about it when you're feeling your own reaction to post-traumatic stress, or you didn't sleep well, you had a bad dream, that really affected you, and you're still trying to recover it. Obviously, that's not a good time to create that dialogue. But when you feel that's safe and you feel healthy and you're in that environment where it seems like a place for dialogue, then I always encourage it. I always say that the dialogue is words passing between each other, but it's ideas that are being reformed and reshaped. Context is critical to doing that, but I always encourage it whenever I can.
And Brent, I'm going to caveat off that. That's true. I think that's what veterans have to be able to do, is to really get to the point where they can create that dialogue. And Brent and I do have a full-blown post-traumatic stress briefing that we give. So any of you that are listening, please go to our contact info, give us a ring, where we've got some great podcasts. Brent and I just did a podcast on PTS. Maybe you can introduce that to them and say, hey, listen to these guys, what they're talking about, and that will give them, obviously, a greater understanding and really help dispel some of the myths and misconceptions that do exist. And we'd be glad to talk to whoever it is inside your organization to be able to help any veteran get that dialogue going. So please give us a call, or get on our web email, send us an email, and we will definitely reach out to us, and we'll reach back. We'll reach extending hand to you, help out.
Great. Well, I want to thank both you, Brent, and Chris. You guys were fantastic. We really appreciate your participation today and sharing your insights that you guys have come across given your work together. And so I think it's really a needed topic, an important topic, and I know we kind of brushed the surface on those 3 agenda items that we have, and like you mentioned, Chris, you could probably spend a whole nother hour talking about PTS alone. So we certainly appreciate your time today. Hope you, the viewers, enjoyed it. We do these VetNet sessions on a bi-weekly basis, and we're very privileged to have Chris Schaefer and Brent Carter with us here today. So Brent, Chris, is there anything you guys want to cover before we sign off for today?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Michelle, just a quick closure. Our slide that mentioned our contact information, we are doing a iTunes podcast, and so we'd really encourage you, if you have topics that you want to talk about, that you'd like to have us cover. We usually do an in-depth analysis on everything that we talk about. We currently have 4 topics up there. I think we've done 4 podcasts so far, so we're going to keep on building that through the year, and you'll see more. But we'd encourage you to just send us an email with what you'd like to see on those podcasts, and we'd be happy to incorporate those. But as Chris mentioned, we're eager to hear from anybody about any needs that you have, and how we can certainly help you from an organizational standpoint in the corporate sector, as well as what you're doing in the transitioning world.
Yep.
Great. Well, again, thank you both so much. We really, really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your time today. Hope all of you enjoyed the broadcast, and stay tuned for more VetNet sessions, again, on a bi-weekly basis, and we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.